The demand came sharp and cutting across the stillness of the morning air. "Excuse me, sir. You can't park your boat here. Move it immediately." I lifted my head from where I was securing the rope to the dock post. The woman's tone was brisk, her face pulled tight with the kind of authority people wear when they think they're in charge. Behind her stood a small cluster of neighbors, arms folded, eyes narrowed, as if my little fishing boat was some grand trespass against their perfect Saturday. I almost laughed. They had no idea. For years, I'd kept quiet. I lived humbly in the cabin tucked away on the North Ridge, rarely engaging in the neighborhood squabbles or lakefront gossip. I didn't flaunt what I owned, because to me, ownership meant stewardship, not power. This lake had been in my family for generations, its waters carrying the echoes of my childhood laughter, my father's teaching voice, and the peace my mother always found when she sat at its edge. I wasn't just tied to it by paperwork, my soul was bound to it. But they didn't know that. The woman, who introduced herself as the HOA president, continued barking orders. She insisted that the lake was community property, and my boat was an eyesore. One man chimed in, calling it junk. Another accused me of disrupting the view of his newly built deck. Their voices rose, overlapping in irritation, and for a moment I let them rage, my hands steady as I adjusted the rope. Then I stood, turned, and faced them. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly. My voice wasn't loud, but the quiet weight in it made them falter. "Because before you demand I move my boat, you should probably understand something." They exchanged uneasy glances, irritation shifting into confusion. "I own this lake," I said evenly. "Not just this dock, not just this side. Every inch of shoreline, every drop of water. It belongs to me." The silence that followed was thick. Some laughed, thinking I was bluffing. Others looked stunned, their confidence cracking. The HOA president stiffened, folding her arms tighter as if she could shield herself with defiance. "That's impossible," she snapped. "This lake is part of our community association." I pulled the folded deed from my backpack. I carried it with me often, not because I felt the need to prove myself, but because I liked the reminder of what my grandfather had left behind. With deliberate care, I handed it to her. She skimmed it quickly, her face draining of color as the seal and signatures made the truth undeniable. The group shifted uneasily. Whispers broke out, the kind of murmurs people make when their certainty is yanked out from beneath them. But I wasn't angry. In truth, I felt a twinge of sadness for them. They saw this lake as a backdrop, a property value booster, a bragging right. They didn't know it the way I did. The smell of pine mixed with morning mist, the way the loons called to each other at dusk, the memory of my father teaching me patience with every fishing line cast into still water. "You treat this lake like it's yours to control," I said softly, "but you've never taken the time to love it." The woman tried to muster a response, but her words faltered. The others stared at the ground. I could have used that moment to embarrass them, to exert power, to kick them all off what was legally mine. But what good would that do? My grandfather used to tell me, true ownership isn't about control. It's about responsibility. And he was right. So instead, I made a choice. "You don't have to like my boat," I said, my tone softening, "but this lake doesn't belong to your HOA. It belongs to those who respect it. I don't mind sharing it, but it won't be treated like a commodity. If you want to enjoy it, then start treating it as something sacred." For the first time, their expressions shifted. A few looked ashamed. One older man nodded quietly, almost relieved that someone had finally said it. Over the weeks that followed, things began to change. The hostility faded into caution, and caution into curiosity. Some neighbors approached me to learn more about the lake's history. Others asked if they could help maintain its shoreline. The woman who once barked at me showed up one morning with a bag of trash she'd collected along the water's edge. She didn't apologize outright, but her actions spoke enough. My boat stayed exactly where it was, but more importantly, the lake began to feel alive again, not just to me, but to everyone who now saw it with new eyes. And as I watched kids skipping stones across its surface, and families walking the trails instead of arguing over property lines, I felt my grandfather's words echo inside me. Ownership wasn't about titles or deeds. It was about legacy, about leaving behind something better than you found it. So when they demanded I move my boat, they didn't realize what they were really demanding. They were asking me to step aside from the very heart of who I was. And that, well, that was never going to happen. The shift in the neighborhood wasn't instant, but it was undeniable. Word had spread quickly that the quiet man from the cabin wasn't just some recluse with an old boat, he was the legal owner of the very lake people built their lives around. At first, the revelation brewed tension. Some resented me for it. They whispered at gatherings, speculated about how I could use my ownership to raise fees, to gate off access, to strip them of their comforts. Fear has a way of turning neighbors into enemies. But I didn't want enemies. I wanted them to see what I saw. One early morning, as the fog hugged the water, I decided to do something different. I set my boat adrift and rowed to the center of the lake. From there, I could see everything: the docks, the scattered cabins, the expensive homes with manicured lawns. All of it surrounded the water like children clinging to their mother. And I thought, maybe it was time to teach them what this lake truly meant. So I started hosting small gatherings. Nothing fancy. I invited families, one at a time, to come fishing with me. I showed their kids how to bait a hook, how to sit still long enough to hear the splash of a fish breaking the surface. I told stories of my grandfather hauling lumber across these waters in a homemade raft, of my mother sitting on the porch whispering prayers as the sun dipped below the horizon. Slowly, the stories wove a thread through them, connecting their lives to mine, and ours to the lake. The first time the HOA president accepted my invitation, I was surprised. She climbed into my boat stiffly, like she was stepping into enemy territory. But after an hour of sitting quietly, her shoulders eased. She watched the water ripple around us, her voice softer when she finally admitted, "I've lived here 10 years and never once touched this lake with my hands." I offered her the fishing rod. She hesitated, then took it. When the line tugged moments later, her laughter rang out, genuine, unguarded. That was the start of something. People began to see the lake differently. The teenagers who used to throw loud parties at midnight started kayaking at dawn. The man who once sneered at my junk boat brought his granddaughter to feed the ducks. The families who treated the shoreline like decoration now brought trash bags on their evening walks. One Saturday, I stood by the dock, watching children splash in the shallows while parents grilled nearby. The woman who once demanded I move my boat approached me again, this time with gratitude in her eyes. "You were right," she said quietly. "We treated this place like it was ours to control. But we never cared for it. Not like you." I smiled. "Now you do. That's what matters." But I wasn't naive. I knew challenges would come. Developers had been circling the area for years, eager to buy up the land around the lake for resorts and luxury cabins. They didn't care about loons or family legacies. They saw dollar signs, and sooner or later, they would come knocking. That night, as the water reflected the moon like a sheet of silver glass, I sat on my porch and thought about the future. I realized something. Owning the lake wasn't just about protecting my past. It was about guarding its future. For my family's memory, for the children skipping stones, for everyone who had finally learned to love it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, folded neatly inside a glossy envelope with a corporate logo stamped in gold. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Inside, the words were blunt: an offer. A developer wanted to buy the lake and the surrounding land. The number they wrote was staggering. Life-changing money, the kind that could make a man disappear to a tropical island for the rest of his days. But as I read the letter on my porch, the sound of children's laughter carried across the water. Families were gathering on the shoreline again, sharing meals, skipping rocks, their voices mixing with the gentle calls of the loons. And in that moment, the offer felt cheap. No amount of money could buy what this lake truly held. Still, the developers didn't give up. A week later, they sent representatives in polished suits. They came with smiles, handshakes, and promises. "Think of the opportunities," one of them said smoothly. "We'll build a resort, hiking trails, luxury cabins. Property values will soar. Your neighbors will thank you." I looked him in the eye and asked, "And when the noise drowns out the loons? When the fishing dies because the water's choked with fuel from jet skis? When kids who once skipped stones can't afford to step on this land? What then?" The man's smile faltered. He didn't answer. But the pressure grew. Some of the wealthier neighbors, tempted by the idea of higher property values, started whispering about how maybe it wouldn't be so bad. They tried to convince me that progress was inevitable, that holding on to nostalgia was selfish. It hurt more than I expected. I had opened my heart to these people, shared my stories, shown them what the lake meant, and now some of them were ready to sell it out for a number on a check. One night, I sat alone by the dock, staring at the ripples under the moonlight. My grandfather's words echoed again. True ownership isn't about control. It's about responsibility. And I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. If I gave in, if I sold, I'd betray not only my family's memory but every child who now saw this lake as theirs to cherish. The next morning, I called a meeting. Everyone who lived around the lake gathered by the old oak tree on the eastern shore. Some came hopeful, others skeptical. The HOA president stood at my side, no longer my enemy but my ally. I held up the developer's letter. They want to buy this lake, I said plainly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And they're offering me more money than most people see in a lifetime. But here's the thing. They don't want the lake. They want to strip it, sell it, ruin it. Voices rose in protest, fear mixing with anger. I let it settle before continuing. I could take this money and walk away. But I won't. Because this lake isn't just water. It's memory. It's peace. It's the sound of loons at dawn and kids learning how to fish. It's a piece of all of us now. And I won't let it be destroyed. The crowd fell, silent. Even those who had been tempted by the promise of wealth shifted uncomfortably, guilt in their eyes. Then, slowly, a voice from the back called out, "What do we do to stop them?" It was the first spark of unity I'd seen in weeks. And I knew then, we weren't powerless. We were going to fight. The developers came back hard, just as I expected. When their charm and offers failed, they switched to pressure. They sent legal notices claiming they had rights of interest because of adjacent property easements. They hinted at lawsuits, at dragging the community into endless court battles. It was a tactic I'd seen before, wear us down until resistance felt impossible. But I wasn't going to stand alone. After that meeting under the oak tree, something shifted. People who once saw me as a stranger now saw me as a leader, though I never asked to be. Families volunteered time. Retirees dug into old county records to uncover past agreements. The younger ones set up online groups, spreading word of what was happening, pulling in support far beyond our little neighborhood. The lake that had once divided us was now uniting us. Still, not everyone stood with me. A small group of neighbors, tempted by promises of buyouts, began siding with the developers. They whispered that I was selfish, that I was dragging the community into unnecessary conflict. One even accused me of playing hero for attention. That betrayal cut deep. These were people who had fished from my boat, people who had once nodded with understanding when I told them what this lake meant. But every cause worth fighting for has its doubters. My grandfather used to say, if everyone's comfortable, you're not standing for much. I clung to those words like armor. The legal fight began in earnest. Papers were filed, claims and counterclaims volleyed back and forth. It felt overwhelming, until the HOA president, the same woman who once demanded I move my boat, walked into the county courthouse beside me, stacks of evidence in her arms. She'd gone from adversary to ally, and her sharp wit and relentless energy became my greatest weapon. But we knew that paperwork alone wouldn't win this. We needed something bigger, so we organized a protest. Not a loud, angry one, but a living demonstration of what the lake meant. On a bright Saturday morning, dozens of families launched their boats, kayaks, and canoes into the water. Kids painted signs that read, "Protect our lake," and "Water is more than profit." We filled the shoreline with laughter, music, and community. Local news stations showed up, cameras capturing the sight of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder for something larger than themselves. The developers hated it. Public opinion was tilting against them. Investors began pulling back, wary of the bad press. But still, they pushed on. Then came the biggest blow. They offered a massive sum to the group of neighbors who had been wavering. And those neighbors, blinded by the money, signed on with the developers. Suddenly, we weren't just fighting outsiders. We were fighting people from within. The division was painful. Friendships fractured. Some neighbors stopped speaking entirely. And for a moment, it felt like we might lose, not because of the developers, but because of our own cracks. That night, I returned to the dock, exhausted. The moon was high, the lake still. I whispered aloud, as though my grandfather might be listening, how do I keep fighting when even my own people are turning against me? And then, as if in answer, a loon called across the water, clear, haunting, eternal. It reminded me of something simple yet powerful. This wasn't about who stood with me or against me. It was about the lake itself, and the generations who would come after. That realization gave me new resolve. And when I woke the next morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. We weren't just going to defend the lake. We were going to protect it forever.